Hi, I'm Beth Ruggiero-York, and I teach long exposure photography for Brian Peterson's School of Photography. That class focuses on the creative side of long exposures and what different things you can do with them. It also spends the last 2 weeks addressing the fundamentals of night photography, which of course are long exposures, so you do get out into the night. I hope you'll join me in one of my classes. That being said, let's get on to the critiques. Thank you. Okay, our first image is from Ludwig Alberti. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Ludwig. His description of this image is: picture was taken on Golden Gate Park. This is a piece of trunk probably from two trees that twist and move like a dancer. This is an excellent subject, and I'm glad you found it when you were out there. There's a lot of really strong positives. I'm going to get into a few things that I would like to see improved or changed. Important with black and white photography is that you cover the entire range of tones, and you pretty much have here. I do think, though, you've got the blackest blacks up here, you've got whites here, but I'd like to see those whites just a little bit brighter. And here in Lightroom, what I am going to do is just open up the basic panel and go to the whites slider and bring it over just a touch. And we're at plus 14. You get a little bit more white going on there, and we haven't blown out any whites. So that's a very easy way. You can also use the tone curve, both in Photoshop and in Lightroom. The other issue that I wanted to address is these trees in the background. They are, to me, they're very distracting. They're bright, and they take you away, the eye away from the main subject. So my suggestion would be to use the adjustment brush in Lightroom. You can also do this in Photoshop, and to paint out or make an adjustment so that the trunks are darker and they don't show up so obviously that they kind of shrink into the background. We're going to use click on here, we're going to use exposure. It's at 0.77. Let's try it at about 0.5 and then see where we go from there. Here's the adjustment brush, and let's make sure it's large enough. I'm going to paint over this tree and paint over this tree. And I'm just doing a quick and dirty job. If you are going to do this, you need to spend a little bit more time and ideally magnify the image, zoom in on the image so that you can do very, very precise work. Although I will say with this particular subject, the precision is not essential. If you go over a little bit, it's not a big deal because you're not affecting the darks because they're already much darker in exposure. And then over here, like I said, I'm just doing a quick and dirty job, and it doesn't seem like it's done much, but we can add some of the some more, or subtract some more exposure, and you see how the tree got dark. The one thing you can do, which is nice in this with the adjustment brush, is go down here to this little box. It's kind of like a switch. Right now it's on, and you can see the adjustments. By clicking it and bring it down, you see, okay, there are without the adjustments. So there is quite a bit of difference since I painted over those. And you can see they're not as obtrusive, so to speak. Okay. The only other issue, well, not issue, actually, what I really love about this image is that you have three, they may not be three trees, but it looks like three trees, a triple subject. And that's an important, that's a very important thing in composing, is to, the eye likes to see threes rather than fours or twos. So you have a very natural subject here to work with, and you did a great job. I assume this is cropped. I like the crop job that you did. Okay, let's go on to the next image. This one is Rocky Mountain National Park Waterfall by Lisa Griffiths, and she shot this at 1/10 of a second, ISO 160 f/22, using her Nikon 28-300 lens at 72 millimeters, and it was shot on the Nikon D810. You've got a great combination, the D810 and the 28-300 lens. It's wonderful for city work or walking around when you don't want to carry multiple lenses, and traveling. She writes, I was trying to see if I could smooth the water on a tripod without using an ND filter, neutral density filter. Because it was overcast and in the woods, I was able to lower my ISO and shutter speed to create smooth water. Well, you have a beautiful composition here, Lisa. The eye leads you to the main subject. Down from this corner, you follow it, and you follow it, and then you get to the actual main part of the waterfall. It's very sharp, and you have a nice foreground as well with these rocks here. What I would suggest, one of my concerns is this tree is just barely cut off, and I'm not sure. I assume you cropped this. I don't know what's up here, if you were trying to get rid of something that was unattractive or a distraction. But I will say that when my eye got up here to the top of the falls, it went over to this tree and it was distracted by the fact that it's cut off. You may or may not be able to do anything about that. It's not a major issue, but something to consider. You always want to look at all your edges when you're shooting and when you're cropping to make sure you're not cutting off something that might be noticeable or too noticeable. But you did a really nice job, and you obviously know what you're doing with slowing down the exposure. You were at 1/10 of a second, you went to f/22. The other thing, and ISO 160, I would like to point out that with the Nikon D810, the lowest native ISO is actually ISO 50. So you can go down a stop and maybe a 1 2/3 stops or 1 1/3 stop to go to ISO 50 and have gotten an even slower exposure if you wanted that. And I'm not saying you should have, but just be aware of that. The exposure you do have here at 1/10 of a second is really a lovely combination of seeing the actual movement of the water. It's not all misty, which isn't a bad thing, but it depends on your preference. But you do have that wonderful detail down here, and then up here you do have the smoothed water of the waterfall. Very nice image, and I love the long exposure and the effort you made to make a long exposure. Okay, the next image is entitled Dancer. It was submitted by Barbara Grimble, and the information that she gave us is she shot it with a Canon Mark II. I assume that's a 5D Mark II, and that she used a 24-105 lens. It was at ISO 100 f/8, and she says 60 seconds. Wanted to express her ballet form, her white swirling dress, her classic beauty, and the form of dance few achieve. This is this is an excellent shot. There's not a whole lot I would do to change it. I would like to say, though, you indicated 60 seconds. 60 seconds, I'm not sure you meant to put that in, because this is a moment in time. It's a short exposure. I don't know if it's 1/60th of a second. Maybe that's what you meant, but it's certainly not 60 seconds. So you might want to check that. At any rate, you did a wonderful job of capturing her in this fantastic moment where she's up on point. Her dress is crisp and yet flowing. And the background allows her to truly stand out. She almost looks like she's floating. with she's on point, but the background and the floor are not, there's no clear line between the two, so it almost looks like she is floating. The only thing I did notice in this shot that I was concerned about, and I assume it's noise, but if you zoom in, hang on. If you zoom in, you see all these specks. I don't think they're part of the background. I suppose they could be, but I don't think they are. I want to say noise because there's a couple of colored ones, but most of them are white. But one thing you could do to get rid of those is either with the clone tool, just each one, and I'll show you. Go to each one. I'll show you just a couple of them. It's a little tedious process, but it works. And those were gone. So that would be my suggestion. Once you see those, and if you were to blow this image up large, it would be even more obvious. You definitely want to get rid of those. But other than that, fantastic job, and really it draws the viewer in, and your eye moves beautifully from the hand down to the feet along the dress. Terrific shot. Into the Light, and it was submitted by Nancy Chiocco. Again, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. If not, I apologize. This image is described. This image was taken at the Oculus train station, New York City. I was ready to depress the shutter when a man walked into it. I liked it because he is half in and half out, and the image appears to me to be an ethereal place, and he is at a point of transition. He can go forwards or backwards. I have a Nikon D7000. It was handheld. Focal length was 70. Aperture priority f5, ISO 400, and I used tungsten light white balance setting. There was no flash, and I worked it in Photoshop. This image, Nancy, is really striking. The whites, the lines, the glow up here, the difference in tones, and then the person walking in who truly draws the eye. That accidental person makes the image. If he had not walked in, it would still be a good image, but it would lack something for the eye to rest on. And with this person, the eye can rest on him, and it also tells a story. Like you said, is he coming or going? And it also makes you, if you're not familiar with this train station, it makes you wonder, well, what is this place? The composition is terrific. You've got the lines that bring the eye up and around. They recede, and this is also a line as they recede into the background. And the difference between the grays here and the bright whites really define the ceiling of this. So there's good light and shadow contrast. My only concern with this image is right here. You can see through the whatever they are, pedestals, back to the background, and I find that distracting. That is, if you're adept with Photoshop, you can also do it in Lightroom, better in Photoshop. I would try to eliminate that. You can either do it by cropping. I don't know how that would work, but we can try right now. So here I am in Lightroom. And let's try to keep it proportional and see how that looks. that works for me. I feel yeah, that works for me. The only thing that concerns me is that it feels like the image is not level after I cropped it. So let's take the crop out. And then let's put the crop back in. Let's try this again. So I can take this and go down, and I think that will help. But the other thing we can do is a slight turn. Then that we end up possibly losing some of the person. Well, I think that's better. At any rate, you get the point, and you can work with that. If you want to clone it out, that works. Or you can use something in the adjustment brush in Lightroom. So there's lots of options, and I'm sure you're aware of them. But great image. This is what makes the image. It's a focal point. That's the subject. This is the environment. That's the subject. Good job. Okay, this is our next image, and it is February snow moon in Maine, submitted by Mark Mallet. And he writes, taken on February 22nd, 2016. This picture is of the snow moon, taken in southern Maine just after sunset. So this is a full moon rising, and I did look up for southern Maine the times that this would have been happening in February of this year. And you hit it right. You've got the moon rising. A couple issues, though. It's a little bit beyond the time of the moonrise when you can equalize the foreground, the darks of the foreground, and the bright moon. I think that if you'd shot it a little bit earlier, you would have had a better dynamic range success here. You've exceeded the dynamic range here, and that's what happens after about 15 minutes when a full moon is rising. The moon has become too bright for you to get a proper exposure. In which case, you can still shoot it, but you need to do bracketing, and it's going to be an HDR image that allows you to cover a broader dynamic range. The moon is here blown out, as you can see when I put my cursor over the triangle. The red part in the moon shows up, and that's the part that's blown out. There's no detail there. It's not recoverable. The composition itself is, in my opinion, you're trying to cover too much ground here. And the interest of the image, which is the house and the moon, are minimized. Instead, it's dominated. Yes, the water is pretty and it makes a nice foreground, but then there's these bushes and trees, and it's a little bit cluttered. So I'm going to give you some suggestions. First of all, it also does not look entirely sharp to me. The moon is sharp. The house, I believe, is sharp. And let's take a look closer and see. Yeah, I think the moon is sharp, and or as sharp as it can be with the fuzz around it, but the house is definitely sharp. So what you've got is infinity focus here, which is what you wanted. These are too close to you. I'm guessing that they were, depending on where they are, and if this was cropped. I don't think it was cropped. They're too close to you to be within your focal range, your depth of field range. So the problem is when you shoot a full moon rising like as this, you have about 15 minutes, depending on the moon and how it relates to the sunset time. But you have about 15 minutes to get a proper exposure where the foreground is properly exposed and the moon is properly exposed. You look like you're right on the edge of that here, right when you're going into the moon being too bright. You do have detail in your foreground. It's dark, not great detail, but it's not totally black. The blacks aren't clipped, and you can see that here in the histogram. You haven't clipped any blacks. So in that sense, yes, you've got a proper exposure as best you could at this point in the moonrise. My other suggestion would be that you could bring detail out in the shadows. Well, I thought about that, and then I said, well, after that being said, I think what you have here is a situation where you want to crop it. So I'm going to, I think this is the interest. This is not interesting here. It's distracting. And this is minimized because you've got such a huge expanse. You didn't give me your settings or what camera equipment you were shooting with, but we're going to try. Now, cropping to this extent, it's going to give you an example of what I see as the composition within the composition. Depending on the camera you are shooting with and how many megapixels it has, your crop can be successful or not successful, in that if you were to blow it up large, you would see a lot of noise, and it wouldn't be as sharp as you'd want it. So even still, that's what I see for a composition within the composition, as I said, in which you can really get the feeling for what you're trying to photograph. Still, I find this brush, which does overlap part of the house, to be very distracting. So I think it's a great subject. On the next full moon, my suggestion would be go and find a location where you don't have all of this in front of you, and you can do a composition in which the moon and the house dominate. So you have to get much closer or use a much longer lens and whatever you are using. So those are some considerations. But it's a good composition. When you crop it, that's not the best answer here. And if I had your settings, I could give you a little bit more detail. But other than that, it's a nice shot, but the sky, there's a lot of noise, so I'm trying to guess what your settings and your camera equipment are. At any rate, good job, and play with your images. You know, there's always, not always, but often an image within an image. Play with the crop tool. You can undo it if you don't like it, but sometimes you find a much better composition in a shot that you might have otherwise just thrown away. So do play with that.